when space quietly entered our daily lives. Most people imagine space agencies as distant institutions, focused only on rockets, astronauts, and breathtaking images of planets millions of miles away. NASA is often seen as a symbol of exploration, not everyday life. Yet, quietly and steadily, space technology has woven itself into the routines of ordinary people across Earth. The glasses that resist scratches, the precise GPS directions guiding drivers through unfamiliar streets, the medical lasers correcting human vision, and even invisible dental braces all trace their origins back to innovations created for space exploration. These technologies were not designed to change daily life at first. They were developed to solve extreme problems faced in orbit, where failure means death and success means survival. Over decades, these solutions filtered down to Earth, reshaping medicine, communication, transportation, and safety without most people ever noticing. But behind these silent contributions lies a far more dramatic truth. Every advancement was born from risk. Space is not forgiving. It offers no oxygen, no shelter, no mercy for mistakes. Every human mission carried beyond Earth's atmosphere is a gamble against physics itself. And among all space missions, one stands apart as a reminder of just how thin the line is between triumph and tragedy. In April 1970, 3 men traveled into the void aboard Apollo 13, expecting history to remember them for a lunar landing. Instead, they became part of a story about survival, ingenuity, and the relentless will to bring human beings home from the edge of extinction. The story of Apollo 13 cannot be understood without returning to the tense atmosphere of the early 1960s. The Cold War was not only fought with weapons and politics, but also with symbols. When the Soviet Union sent the first satellite, then a dog, and eventually Yuri Gagarin into space, it sent shockwaves through the United States. Space became a measure of national strength and technological supremacy. In response, President John F. Kennedy issued a bold challenge. America would land a man on the moon and return him safely to Earth before the decade ended. It was an audacious promise, made when success was far from guaranteed. Years of failures, explosions, and near misses followed, but step by step, NASA learned. Apollo missions progressed cautiously, orbit by orbit, until July 1969, when humanity finally set foot on the moon. With Apollo 11 and Apollo 12 completed, space travel began to look almost routine. Confidence grew. Apollo 13 was meant to be another scientific mission, aimed at a more challenging lunar region known for its rough terrain. Public attention faded, and media interest declined. Few people tuned in, believing they had already seen it all. But beneath the surface of this apparent normalcy, a chain of hidden flaws and overlooked risks was already forming, waiting silently for the moment when everything would go wrong in engineering and preparation. James Lovell, the mission commander, was a veteran astronaut and a father of 4, known for calm judgment under pressure. John Swigert, the command module pilot, joined the mission at the last minute, replacing a crewmate exposed to illness. Fred Hayes, the lunar module pilot, was a rookie, experiencing space for the first time, leaving behind a young family on Earth. Together they launched on April 11, 1970, lifted into the sky by fire and mathematics. The spacecraft was divided into 3 main sections: the command module, where the crew lived, the lunar module, designed to land on the moon, and the service module, housing oxygen tanks, fuel cells, and the main engine. Everything depended on precise timing and coordination between these parts. For the first 2 days, the mission unfolded exactly as planned. The astronauts conducted routine tasks, broadcasted calm television segments, and even joked about boredom. Traveling hundreds of thousands of kilometers from Earth, nothing seemed unusual. Yet hidden within the service module, damaged wiring sat dangerously close to pure oxygen. The crew did not know it, mission control did not know it, and the world did not know it. but the mission was already moving toward a moment that would redefine space exploration forever. At 55 hours into the mission, more than 300,000 kilometers from Earth, a simple command was issued to stir the oxygen tanks. It was a routine procedure, one performed many times before without incident. Seconds later, a violent explosion tore through the service module. The spacecraft shuddered. Warning lights flashed. Alarms screamed. For a brief moment, the crew believed it was a malfunction or a prank. Then reality set in. Oxygen tank number 2 had exploded, crippling the spacecraft's electrical systems. Fuel cells began shutting down, draining power, water, and air. When James Lovell looked out the window, he saw something terrifying. Oxygen venting into space, escaping in a silent white cloud. The spacecraft was bleeding life itself into the void. Calmly, but with unmistakable urgency, Lovell radioed Mission Control the words that would echo through history. Houston, we have a problem. On Earth, engineers stared at their screens in disbelief. Multiple failures at once should not have been possible, yet data confirmed the worst. The moon landing was instantly abandoned. Survival became the only goal. 3 men were stranded in space, moving fast in the wrong direction, with systems dying one by one. Panic would have meant death, so discipline took over. The greatest rescue mission ever attempted had just begun. Within minutes of the explosion, the mission transformed from exploration to survival. Mission Control in Houston faced a reality no simulator had fully prepared them for. A crippled spacecraft, losing oxygen, electricity, and water, with 3 human lives depending on decisions made in real time. The service module, once the heart of the spacecraft, was now a liability. Its engines could no longer be trusted, and its oxygen tanks were nearly empty. Engineers quickly realized that the command module alone could not support the crew for the journey home. The only option left was the lunar module, a fragile vehicle designed to keep 2 astronauts alive for short periods on the moon. Now, it would have to act as a lifeboat for 3 men in deep space. The decision was made swiftly. Power to the command module was shut down to preserve its batteries for re-entry, plunging it into darkness and cold. The crew moved into the lunar module, carrying with them only what was essential. This choice saved their lives, but created new problems. The lunar module had limited oxygen, limited water, and systems never meant to run continuously. Every watt of power became precious. Every breath counted. As the spacecraft drifted farther from Earth, the mission's success would no longer be measured by landing sites or scientific samples, but by whether the crew could stay alive long enough to come home. The lunar module was never intended to be a sanctuary. It was thin, cramped, and lacked basic comforts. Its walls were so delicate that a careless movement could cause damage. Inside, there were no seats, no proper sleeping arrangements, and no insulation for prolonged exposure to cold. Yet, this fragile machine now carried the hopes of millions. Engineers on Earth calculated how long it could sustain 3 people instead of 2. The answer was unsettling. Only a couple of days. No one yet knew exactly how long the journey back would take. Temperatures inside the module began to drop as systems were powered down to conserve energy. Condensation formed on surfaces, and breath turned visible in the air. To save water, the crew drastically reduced their intake, leading to dehydration and exhaustion. Sleep became nearly impossible. As hours turned into days, physical discomfort blended with psychological strain. Meanwhile, Mission Control worked relentlessly, simulating scenarios, rewriting procedures, and questioning every assumption. There was no manual for this situation. Every solution had to be invented from scratch, under pressure, with no room for error. The lunar module kept the crew alive, but barely. And even if it could sustain them temporarily, the problem of navigation remained. The spacecraft was still on a trajectory that would send it past Earth into endless space, unless corrected with extreme precision. 2 possible paths lay ahead. One option was to fire the engines and attempt a direct return to Earth, risking catastrophic failure if damaged systems malfunctioned. The second option was slower but safer. Use the moon's gravity as a slingshot to bend the spacecraft's path back toward Earth. The crew and mission control chose the latter. This meant flying around the moon without landing, relying on gravity itself as a guide. To make this work, the lunar module's descent engine had to be used in a way it was never designed for. Worse still, the spacecraft's balance was completely altered. Controls behaved unpredictably, turning steering into guesswork. Calculations had to be done on Earth using computers far more powerful than those on board. Instructions were then transmitted to the crew, who had to execute them perfectly. A critical engine burn was performed to adjust speed and trajectory. It worked, but new data showed it was not enough. Time was running out faster than expected. Power consumption threatened to exceed available reserves. Engineers debated fiercely whether to shut down guidance systems to save energy, knowing that doing so could leave the crew blind. Every decision balanced survival against navigation. The margin for error was razor thin, and the consequences of miscalculation were unthinkable. As the spacecraft coasted silently through space, conditions inside worsened. With systems mostly shut down, temperatures dropped to near freezing. The crew wore multiple layers of clothing, huddled together for warmth. Food was rationed, water nearly eliminated. Fatigue set in deeply, clouding concentration. Fred Hayes developed a painful infection, accompanied by fever, adding another layer of danger. Despite this, the crew maintained discipline, sharing responsibilities and supporting one another. On Earth, the situation captured global attention. News broadcasts interrupted regular programming. Families of the astronauts waited in agonizing uncertainty, while people across continents followed each update. Governments offered assistance. Communities prayed. Yet, the challenges were far from over. Carbon dioxide levels inside the lunar module began to rise, threatening suffocation. The module's filters were running out, while unused filters sat in the powerless command module, incompatible in design. Once again, creativity became the only path forward. Engineers on the ground devised a solution using only materials already on board. It would be up to the crew to build it in space, guided by radio instructions. Survival now depended not just on machines, but on human ingenuity. The rising carbon dioxide levels inside the lunar module presented a silent and deadly threat. Unlike power loss or freezing temperatures, suffocation would give little warning and no chance for recovery. The lunar module's round carbon dioxide filters were never meant to handle 3 people for an extended period. Meanwhile, the command module contained plenty of spare filters, but they were square and incompatible with the lunar module system. It was a problem that seemed absurd in its simplicity and terrifying in its consequences. On Earth, engineers gathered in rooms filled with parts identical to those on the spacecraft. Their task was to design a solution using only items the astronauts already had: plastic bags, cardboard, hoses, and duct tape. Time was critical. As carbon dioxide levels climbed, cognitive ability would decline, increasing the risk of mistakes. Instructions were radioed up in precise steps, and the crew carefully assembled the improvised device in zero gravity. The result looked crude, but it worked. Carbon dioxide levels dropped, and the immediate danger passed. This moment became one of the most powerful symbols of the mission. It showed that survival in space was not just about advanced technology, but about adaptability and problem-solving under pressure. The solution would later be taught in engineering courses as an example of creativity constrained by reality. Yet even as this crisis was resolved, the crew and mission control knew the greatest challenge still lay ahead. Getting back to Earth would require flawless execution, despite exhaustion, cold, and failing systems. Returning from the moon is not simply a matter of pointing toward Earth. The angle of re-entry into Earth's atmosphere must be almost perfect. Too shallow, and the spacecraft would skip off the atmosphere, drifting back into space. Too steep, and it would burn up in a fireball. The acceptable window was only a few degrees wide. Under normal conditions, guidance computers ensured accuracy. Apollo 13, however, was anything but normal. The guidance system had been powered down to conserve energy, leaving the crew with limited tools. Manual corrections became necessary. Using Earth as a reference point through the spacecraft's window, the astronauts performed delicate engine burns by hand. This required coordination, trust, and precision. Under extreme fatigue, mission control calculated burn times and angles, sending instructions that had to be followed exactly. Communication delays and blackouts added tension, especially as the spacecraft passed behind the moon, temporarily cutting off all contact. Those minutes of silence were agonizing. When contact was restored, relief spread through the control room. The spacecraft was on course, but barely. Every remaining maneuver would draw from the last reserves of power. There was no backup plan left. The crew was committed to a path that either ended safely on Earth or not at all. The mathematics of survival had become personal. As Earth grew larger in the spacecraft's windows, the crew faced a task never attempted before. The command module, shut down for days, had become bitterly cold. Moisture-coated surfaces, and there was real concern that systems might fail when powered back on. Batteries could be damaged. Fuel lines could be frozen. Normally, powering up the command module followed a lengthy checklist developed over months. Now, engineers had only days to create an entirely new procedure that used minimal power. Every switch mattered. With guidance from mission control, the crew slowly brought the command module back to life. One by one, systems responded. Lights flickered on. Instruments stabilized. Against all expectations, the spacecraft endured conditions far beyond its design limits. Before re-entry, the damaged service module was jettisoned, revealing the extent of the explosion. One entire side had been blown open. The sight confirmed how close the crew had come to disaster. Soon after, the lunar module, their lifeboat, was also released, destined to burn up in Earth's atmosphere. It had done its job. Now only the command module remained between three men and the vast forces of atmospheric re-entry. The final test was moments away. As Apollo 13 hit Earth's atmosphere, it transformed into a blazing sphere of plasma. Communication blackout was expected to last 3 minutes, but as time stretched beyond that, tension gripped mission control in living rooms around the world. Every second without a signal deepened the fear that the heat shield had failed. Families waited in silence. Engineers stared at their clocks. Then, finally, a calm voice broke through the static. The spacecraft had survived. Parachutes deployed, slowing the capsule as it descended toward the Pacific Ocean. After nearly 6 days in space, Apollo 13 splashed down safely on April 17, 1970. The rescue was complete. Against overwhelming odds, all 3 astronauts were alive. The mission was later called a successful failure. It did not achieve its original goal, but it accomplished something far more important, proving that human ingenuity, teamwork, and discipline could overcome catastrophic failure. Investigations later revealed the cause of the explosion, leading to design changes that improved safety for future missions. Apollo 13 became a turning point, reminding humanity that exploration carries risk, but also that preparedness and resilience can turn disaster into survival. It remains one of the greatest stories ever told in the history of spaceflight. Once the crew of Apollo 13 was safely back on Earth, the mission did not simply end with celebration. NASA immediately began a deep and methodical investigation to understand how such a catastrophic failure had occurred. Engineers examined every component, every test record, and every decision made during the spacecraft's construction and preparation. The conclusion was unsettling but clear. Years earlier, the oxygen tank involved in the explosion had been modified for a different spacecraft. During this process, voltage to the tank's internal heaters had been increased, but the protective thermostatic switches were never upgraded to handle the higher power. During a ground test before launch, this mismatch caused overheating that damaged insulation inside the tank. The damage went unnoticed. In space, when the tank was stirred, exposed wiring ignited the oxygen, triggering the explosion. This was not a single mistake, but a chain of small oversights that aligned in the worst possible way. Apollo 13 revealed how complex systems can fail, not through dramatic errors, but through quiet assumptions left unchecked. The investigation reshaped NASA's engineering culture. Redundancy was increased. Testing procedures became more aggressive. Communication between departments improved. These changes were not abstract. They directly influenced the safety of future astronauts. The mission that nearly ended in tragedy ultimately saved lives by forcing NASA to confront uncomfortable truths about risk, responsibility, and the limits of technology. Apollo 13 left a legacy far beyond the mission itself. It became a case study in crisis management, engineering ethics, and teamwork under pressure. Flight director Gene Kranz famously reminded his team that failure was not an option, not as a slogan, but as a mindset. Engineers trusted astronauts, astronauts trusted engineers, and both trusted the systems they built together. That trust was tested to its absolute limit and held. The mission changed how spacecraft were designed, emphasizing fault tolerance and crew survivability. It also changed how people viewed space exploration. The public saw astronauts not as distant heroes, but as vulnerable humans, relying on thousands of unseen minds working together. Schools began teaching Apollo 13 not just as history, but as an example of problem solving. Business leaders studied it as a lesson in decision making. Engineers saw it as proof that preparation and creativity matter as much as raw intelligence. Even decades later, its influence remains visible in space missions and high-risk industries on Earth. Apollo 13 did not conquer the moon, but it conquered something more profound: the belief that even in the face of overwhelming failure, cooperation and calm reasoning can still lead to survival. That lesson transcends space, and in a world filled with advanced computers, automation, and artificial intelligence, the story of Apollo 13 feels both distant and deeply relevant. The spacecraft's onboard computer was weaker than a modern calculator, yet human judgment filled the gaps where technology fell short. Today, systems are faster and smarter, but complexity has also increased. The lesson of Apollo 13 is not that technology will save us, but that people must be ready when it fails. Whether in aviation, medicine, cybersecurity, or space exploration, unexpected problems still arise. Apollo 13 reminds us that resilience comes from preparation, communication, and adaptability. It also shows the importance of humility in engineering. Even the most advanced systems can hide unseen flaws. For the general public, the mission stands as a reminder that progress is not smooth or guaranteed. Every achievement is built on lessons learned from close calls and near disasters. For space agencies planning missions to Mars and beyond, Apollo 13 remains a warning and a guide. Farther distances mean fewer rescue options. Survival will depend even more on foresight and teamwork. More than 50 years later, the voices from that mission still echo, teaching new generations that calm thinking under pressure can turn the impossible into Apollo 13 is often remembered as a failure, but history has judged it differently. It is remembered as a triumph of the human spirit. 3 astronauts left Earth expecting to walk on the moon and returned having faced death in silence, cold, and darkness. Thousands of people on the ground worked without rest, driven by a single purpose: bring them home. The mission proved that exploration is not about perfection, but about perseverance. Every major step forward carries risk, and courage lies in facing that risk with preparation and integrity. Today, as humanity looks towards new frontiers, from Mars to deep space, The story of Apollo 13 remains a guiding light. It reminds us that technology alone is never enough. Success depends on people who refuse to give up, who adapt when plans collapse, and who trust one another when the stakes are highest. If this story moved you, if it reminded you of what humans can achieve together, then stay connected to this channel. Subscribe for more stories that explore science, history, and the hidden moments that shaped our world. Apollo 13 did not land on the moon, but it landed something far greater in human memory: proof that even in failure, greatness can emerge.